Work session item number 2. Apologies to those who got kicked off the conference bridge. No action is being taken on these anyway. It's just a chance to talk about these items. Who wants to speak to item number 2?
This is Rob Moore, Utah County Attorney's Office. Let me just kind of tee this up if I could. We were approached by the attorney for Sundance asking us to consider this development credits allocation agreement. We've had a couple of meetings, we've had a couple of drafts going back and forth. What I understand this agreement does is Sundance has a number of development credits which were earned when they basically took their entire property and they essentially, under our ordinance, clustered it, or allowed it to be clustered where they could have credits, but it ties up all their property. And the credits were determined by the slope of the property. So lower slopes would enable them to have higher credits, higher slopes would have less credits. And currently, so this has been going on this is from a long time ago. Currently, they have 2 different areas of development credits on both sides of SR 92, which goes up to Sundance. What their intention here is to combine those areas into one area through this development credits allocation agreement. That's one of the first things they're trying to do. The second thing they're trying to do is to, I think, try to work through a process whereby they've worked through all of the entities who own property up in the Sundance area to be a part of this agreement. And number 3, they're trying to make a process going forward on how these development credits might be allocated on their end. So that's what they're doing here, as far as I understand, and they can probably give you a better explanation why, if their attorney's on the phone today. I think the county, as I've talked with community development, we didn't really have concerns about the first couple of items. The third item is how these credits are tracked and allocated and tracked. What the current process is that these development credits are tracked on each amended subdivision plat that comes before the county commission. There's actually a table, development credit table on those plat. And that's how we've been currently tracking the use of these development credits. And when I say development credits, what I mean by that is if Sundance were to deed me a 10-acre parcel and give me 3 development credits, then I could build a threeplex or some kind of a opportunity to build at least 3 residences on that 10-acre parcel. But it would count against their complete and total development credits that they have. So what the concern of the staff has been is that this process whereby the amended subdivision plats include this development credit table has been a working process, and I think it's worked well, at least from staff's perspective of trying to keep track, ongoing understanding of where these what the number of development credits are outstanding and what's currently being used. This proposal here is a new process whereby each development credit that's being allocated would be doing so by an agreement, and then it would essentially be amending this allocation agreement, and would not or no longer have a table on the amended subdivision plat. I think it's a concern that Sundance has, and maybe they can address it when I'm finished here. But I think the staff is concerned that we don't know if this new process is going to work well, where we can keep adequate track of these development credits and how they are being utilized. And so I did add some language that I have not heard back from their attorney whether they had some significant problems with, and that's related to, and you'll see on the attached agenda requests where it has the county approved version. And in the county approved version, the language I've added essentially says that if this process doesn't work, we can go back to requiring the development credit table in all plats, all future plats. So I think what the county staff's trying to do is try it out, see if it works well. It's a little bit complicated. I probably didn't explain it in a way that's very easy to understand, but I'm trying to give you the nuts and bolts of it without really getting into all the details of it. But I'll let others who may want to address it, and may address your questions before you have them. Do we have someone on the line from Sundance?
Yes, we do. This is Tom Bennett. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Oh, great. Yes, this is Tom Bennett. I'm with the law firm of Ballard Spahr, and I represent Sundance, and have worked with your folks there in coming up with this agreement. So I'd be glad to explain a little bit about what Sundance was trying to achieve in putting together this agreement, or I can just respond to your questions, whichever you prefer.
I'd love to hear what you're trying to put together, kind of from your perspective. This is Commissioner
Sure.
Ivey.
Hi, Commissioner Ivey. Thank you. This is actually an agreement that we started working on a couple of years ago, and it just sort of got stalled in the process, and so we've recently brought it back to life to try and get it to a finish line and a state where it could be acceptable to both Sundance and the county. What we're working to do here, it arose out of a concern, some comments back and forth in discussions with the county, and there seemed to be some uncertainty as to who owned and who controlled the development credits. The development credits are documented currently on Sundance Plat A, which is the master plat for Sundance. That plat covers property owned by seven different property owners. And so if there was to be a transfer of development credits, either from one of those parties to another one of those parties, or a transfer of development credits from one of those parties to a third party, say someone who came in to buy a piece of property, there was some uncertainty as to, first of all, who would have the right to transfer those development credits, and then secondly, how it would occur. And so that was the foundational problem we tried to address with this. So what we do in this agreement, one of the things it does is all of the parties agree that the ownership of the development credits is going to be in one of those parties, which is currently Sundance Development Corporation. The other issue to address was then how would development credits be transferred? Well, the way it currently exists, if you were to transfer a development credit, it would require an amendment to the subdivision plat, which, as you're aware, is a complicated and time-consuming process. And so we wanted to make that a little bit easier, and I think do it in a way that sort of was economical in terms of time, both for the landowners and for the county. But we recognize that the county needs to be fully aware of any transfers and development credits, and there needs to be an ongoing public record of who owns those development credits and how many are owned by one or more people. And so what we provided for in this agreement is a clear mechanism for how development credits can be transferred. It would be by an assignment agreement, and there is a draft, a form assignment agreement attached as an exhibit to this agreement. And then the agreement also requires that if there were to be a transfer of development credits, then the development credits table would have to be modified consistent with that assignment, and modified and then recorded as an amendment to this agreement. so it would allow for development credits to be transferred without having to involve the county commission, but it would do so in a way that there was always a clear public record as to how many development credits there were and who was the owner of those development credits. The language that was proposed by Mr. Moore to protect the county and basically to allow the county to require that we go back to the old method of reflecting development credits on the plat itself if this method turns out to be unacceptable to the county. That language is acceptable to Sundance. And so from our perspective, we see this as something that benefits Sundance and facilitates their efforts to move forward into the future, and at the same time, it provides little, if any, risk to the county, because if the county concludes that there is something in this process that just isn't working effectively, then the county could say you need to go back to the old way of doing it, and Sundance is agreeable to that.
So I've got a question for you. This is Commissioner Lee. You mentioned there was 7 or so different owners currently. Are they unanimous in this and having one entity, which would be Sundance, be the primary holder of the credits?
Yes, they are, and they would all be parties to this agreement where they would sign off on that.
I see.
Now, all of those landowners are Sundance entities, Sundance-related entities, with the exception of one, which is Dr. Stephen Minton. But in the agreement, the agreement has been prepared for Dr. Minton and his wife to sign it as well, where they would be acknowledging that they don't own any of the development credits. I don't think there's any question about that now, and so we don't anticipate that there would be any problem from them with that. But this agreement incorporates the signature and agreement of all of the property owners.
Okay.
Thank you. I don't have any further comments.
I appreciate your response to those questions. I don't have any additional either.
Okay, we'll move to work session item number 3.
If you'd like, I can lead out. This is Rob Morgan, Utah County Attorney's Office. I've been working with Spanish Fork to develop this addendum number 1 to the Utah County Fair and Local Cooperation Agreement regarding the expansion of the Spanish Fork Fairgrounds. I know that you've met with representatives of Spanish Fork in the past regarding it. There is an agreement on your agenda. I did revise it today. Looks like I may need to make a couple additional revisions. The thing, as I understand it now, the note I got from Junior Baker, who's the city attorney for Spanish Fork City, is that the appraised value was higher than the 2.2 million. That was the negotiated price. And there's an additional 200,000 that gets you up to that appraised value that would represent the monies to be utilized for cleanup purposes. Of that total amount, the county would be, under this agreement, would be obligated for half of the 2.2 and half of the 200,000 for cleanup purposes. So at a high of 1.2. Now, I sent you an email referencing this and also mentioning in that there is a portion of this property that Spanish Fork City would like to retain, I think, for a public works facility, and they would subtract that from the total cost of the purchase of the property, not from the cleanup, from the purchase of the property. So this agreement contemplates that. It needs to make a couple of minor tweaks to kind of deal with the new understanding. And then the other thing that was requested by Spanish Fork, I think about a month ago, was they've already made the payment on this property and put it in an escrow account, as part of their deal with the landlord. They need to get our half, according to them, by the end of their fiscal year, which is June 30th, 2020. They are still working on the clean status, receiving that clean status from DEQ, and they are hopeful to receive that before the end of this calendar year. If they do not receive that by the end of this calendar year, then essentially the deal, I think, falls apart, and they would return the money that, according to this agreement, they would return the money back to Utah County for one half that we set aside for this property. So that's what I understand this is to do. I think there might be representatives from Spanish Fork City on the line who may want to add some comments or discuss it further, but that's my understanding.
I'll just add just to kick off, a couple of concerns that I would have for this is my understanding, and this is a little bit difficult because every so often we meet as a fair committee and then a bunch of documents get exchanged, and it's been a while since we've all met on this topic, but my understanding is that the county committed $2 million, or half of a $2 million commitment to purchase some adjacent property as it related to parking. And that was not really something that necessarily had the full support of the current commission, but it was understood that there had been some ongoing long-term conversations and a partnership, and so that we would honor that and move forward on that basis. However, at least in the conversations I recall, that was based on us getting clean title, no environmental risk, the deal closed, and we would pay our portion. And that's kind of morphed into, certainly we were aware of kind of the city has now gone, I know there's a lot of complications, there's a complication with the property owner, but we kind of feel like we weren't structuring the deal, the city was structuring the deal. And that was the city's choice to do it that way. And so the idea that, and so I've been personally a little bit concerned when I've heard that, funding the land or funding the deal and then into a title company, it'll be refunded if they don't get clean. And then there was questions about, are we just going to use some of our additional funds to do the cleanup? And those were all concerning to me, except for the fact that I understood the city was in the driver's seat and they would only come to us when they had clean title, when they had it cleaned up for our portion of the reimbursement. So if the ask is to get our funds sooner, I do have pause on that. I think I would be a lot more comfortable. And I think that was really the only commitment that was ever made, is that we would reimburse for our 50% once this was all cleaned up and acquired.
So you have a handful of Spanish Fork representatives on the phone. Seth, the city manager, and then our Parks and Rec director, Dale, and Nick, I believe, are also on the call. I think we can respond to some of those concerns. Maybe try to take them one at a time. The concept from the beginning, as we reviewed it with you late in the summer last year, and before we purchased the land, is that we would indemnify the county from any issues, any risk associated with the land. And I believe that contract, Mr. Moore, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, but I believe the contract does give the county that indemnification. We worked through those details with you and with the seller. The seller really didn't really matter to the seller, but we worked through that with you after consultation with the state, knowing that getting their full approval may not happen in the time frames that we collectively need. And so the city was willing to take that indemnification risk away from you and put it all in the city. So it's as if it's clean to you. And frankly, the state process is extremely slow. Been significantly slower than we had hoped. The seller's been pretty slow. And then, of course, the state is pretty slow. I think we signed the purchase agreement in August, and we're making progress, but it's really slow. So we're going to certainly go beyond our fiscal year. So the protection's there for the county in terms of any liability of the property. We'll indemnify that risk. The purchase price, as Mr. Moore stated, was the 2.4, but we negotiated, if you recall, some of you may recall, some may not, but we negotiated with the seller to decrease the price from the 2.4 down to 2.2. But we together, and we discussed this together, the city and the county, that we would stay at the 2.4 price and put that remaining $200,000 towards cleanup. Your amount will be less net because we want to take some of that land, as noted, for a shop facility. And we'd have to get the exact numbers, and I actually don't know that we have those fully figured out yet, but by agreement, whatever it is, we take, whether it's an acre, 3/4 of an acre, or an acre and a half, or whatever, then we'll bear the full cost of that land. So it's very likely that your net price will be somewhere around $1 million or something like that, as opposed to the 1.2 it could have been. But I don't know if I'm answering any of your questions, Commissioner Range, but that's been the understanding the city's had as we've moved forward with you, and for now 10 months or so.
I think you've landed on most of the points, and you've given great responses to each of them, except for the timing issue. I think that's the outstanding issue, and I don't know what your perspective has been on that.
So ask the timing question again, so I make sure I'm more.
Well, so
focused
you've
on my
talked about how ultimately our net cost could end up being about the $1 million, how, it's going to be transferred to us clean. We've got indemnification from the city. I think I appreciate those clarifications. I think the only other part is that I think we only expected to have to fund and close when the city has got through the seller issues, got through the state issues, and it's a done deal. And so when this addendum, it looks like you're asking for the county to fund before all of those things are taken care of.
So, and thank you. We are proceeding through, and the issue is significantly advanced. We're very comfortable that it will get to the clean place with the state. It's just a matter of time and testing, and then approval of the plan. Frankly, one thing we've learned from the state is that we won't probably have their full approval until the site is improved, because in part the plan will cap at least a significant portion of the property with a parking lot, and the state will give their full final approval when that's done, and we don't have a timetable yet for that final work. So I think what you're looking for in that final statement from the state is potentially a couple of years away, and we don't have the ability to carry that. We don't have the ability to carry that amount for a couple of years. We need, fronting that $1 million out of the city will be pretty painful to our budget. And so one of the things that we negotiated with you was that indemnification. I think if you asked any of us involved in the project, we're about, at this point, we'd be very comfortable in saying we're going to buy the land and it will transfer fully. It's already in the city's name, and it will transfer fully, and it will get to that clean state from the state clean status from the state. But now that we are further into it, we know that it's going to take a lot longer than anticipated to get that full approval. And so the indemnification gives you the comfort that you're not getting into trouble.
So I kind of, I appreciate that. I think that's helpful perspective. I think one perspective that I might offer is that I think the reason why the city is running with this is that the county essentially said, we don't have appetite to do this. So in other words, if we had been involved and our legal department had been involved, my guess is we would not have done the purchase in this way. We probably would have been a little bit, gone through a little bit more review of what is the environmental review process before initiating all of this. And so in some ways, and so that's kind of the deal, is you indemnified us, so we said, okay, it's your process, you take it and run with it. But I think the other side of that equation, so that gave you some flexibility to act quickly, and I think the other side is we don't step in until you've finished it, until it's completely done. And there might be some technical difference there, because I know you're saying it might not be all the way done until the project is finished. But at least the seller sign-off piece and the title company sign-off piece and maybe a preliminary state piece, I think those are things that I would have expected to see completed.
Well, so the seller's done, and the title's actually in the city's name. The state's initial work is done, and we can go, I guess, we can get you some of those details. But all of that said, the final approvals from the state won't be for a season, a couple, maybe even a couple of years. In all candor, the seller, we wouldn't have had the ability, I believe, to move forward in any arrangement. The seller's tolerance level was at 0. And the issue that we have been grappling with in our meetings with the county and fairgrounds committee for the last couple of years is, how do we deal with the long-term parking challenges of that facility? And this is the only place that we can grow. There is no other alternative for suitable parking. And so we have absolutely felt the timing need to move forward. And yeah, it may not be ideal, and you may not have wanted to move forward due to the comfort that you had, but we understand the challenges at Spanish Fork, and we were willing to take some of those additional challenges on ourselves so as to facilitate it. And
Totally,
provide
which
that
is,
comfort.
those were not criticisms, they were just an understanding
I know.
that we were on the other side of that, yeah.
Yeah. So all things being considered, we move forward understanding that we could have that. Well, anyways, I've said that again. I'm repeating myself. So. That's where we're at. We fronted the $2 million, $2.2 million for the land in, I think, in August, and are looking for something before we cross over our fiscal year. We'll take a revenue hit, right, of $1.1 million to our budget when it crosses over fiscal year. So.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, the whole other area that's uncertain to me is, so what does the next 2 years look like? What do the next steps look like? And that's where I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with our current level of documentation or moving forward with this is, what about the paving and all of that project work that is going to be needed for the state to give you final approval? Is that just on the city? Are you going to ask the county to participate in that? I think those are other questions.
Yeah, and we've had those discussions previously in previous fairground committee meetings as well, and certainly the conversations, the agreements, the discussions have all been that this work would be done together. I know there's been some debate and some discussion as of late about what role the county would play in those, but for the last handful of years, of course, the discussion's been the partnership and the way that it has worked. So those details in the future, of course, need to be figured and ironed out. But the state, sorry, I lost my train of thought.
They need to be ironed out, and I don't disagree with some of the comments that you've made there, but I'll just say, I think it, just as I've tracked in my first year in office, kind of how this has developed, I don't even think that Commissioner Lee or Commissioner Ivey were involved when some of these initially began. And so every next commissioner is required to kind of walk into the dynamic, and then there's conversations of, well, this was the plan, this is what we were talking about. And so for me, there's enough happening here. I just think it's about time to try to document all of it.
Sure, and so one thing I was going to say and lapsed was with this most recent part of the project, again, in some of the meetings that we've had with the Fairgrounds Committee, we assigned, as a committee, we assigned certain portions of this purchase project to the county, and that didn't go, it didn't progress. We didn't get anywhere, and then the committee decided, well, as the city, you have more capabilities and more time to do it. And so it was put back to the city, which we were happy to take. But you, as a county, you've been as involved in the project, I would say, as you have wanted to be. It's not something that I think is the commissioner's radar, and I'm not intending to be offensive as I'm saying this, but this isn't something that I think you want to deal with on a day-to-day basis. A few years ago, this was probably before my time as the city manager, before I was on the committee, but I know a few years ago there was at least one staff member from the county that participated in the Fairgrounds Committee meetings. I think as a voting member, I don't believe all county commissioners were on that committee. To your point, Commissioner Ainge, having that turnover in your representatives on that committee be just those elected officials does create that lack of potentially institutional knowledge. I think that's something that is certainly a challenge to the function of that operation there. And I don't know exactly how to solve that, but it is a challenge because, as you stated, you walk in and it's all brand new to you. But if there was historical knowledge, you wouldn't have that. And so I don't know how to solve that. But it is an operational challenge for us with the fairgrounds as well.
And I think, Seth, this is Commissioner Lee, in looking down through that, I think that's a fair assessment. There's challenge to it, and that's why I think it's always important for us to get things down in writing as much as possible and then adhere to it. And if there's a change to it, then we can address that. It looks like we're on, the brink of a change from what was agreed to. And I fully anticipated, looking at the process, that we would be giving you that money before your end of your fiscal year. So if there's a change to that, we probably should just have some more conversation, make sure and tweak it so that we all understand where we're at, and then move forward with it so that we have it all down and we know everyone knows. So when change comes, if change comes, it's down there and we can see it.
Yeah. There is always a ripcord, not always. At some point, the ripcord goes away, but we do have a ripcord in the purchase contract. And if the ripcord is pulled because we aren't able to meet the needs from the state, we aren't able to get the things that we need, there are reverter clauses, and all of the monies are returned to the city and then consequently the county. And if that ripcord is pulled, which I don't believe it will be, I think we've gone far enough along that we're comfortable as a city. We're comfortable with the process, and we're comfortable that we can see the end. It's just a matter of the time and the state process is required. I think we're all comfortable saying we aren't going to pull that ripcord, but if we have to, we still have that ripcord in place with the buyer. With the seller. And if that's pulled, then you'd be consulted on the decision to pull it, and then once the money's returned to us, it would be immediately returned to you. And that is a protection that we put into the original purchase contract with the seller.
Is there 100% coverage on that right now? Because I know initially.
Yeah, the money actually hasn't, and it's to his absolute and utter frustration. It has not entered his hands. It is being held in escrow, and it's only gaining whatever interest rate, 1 or 2%, which today may be a great rate. But since August it wasn't. But yeah, it's actually only in escrow, and he's just looking at it at the escrow account. He hasn't taken possession of it.
So, but isn't there was a portion of the escrow that was allowed to be used for the cleanup? So to the extent those had already been used, and then the ripcord was pulled, there wouldn't be 100% refund, or am I thinking about
Or
that?
some mitigation if you're putting down asphalt or anything of that nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there, we negotiated with the seller that the possibility that we could get at, and I don't have the contract in front of me, but I think it was a potential $500,000 of that purchase price, but our $200,000 was first, and so if it was going to go beyond our $200,000, you see, he conceded to lower the price from 2.4 to 2.2 because we said we'll take the first 200,000 of cleanup.
Got it.
And
So that
but we've worked-
200,000 would be at risk if the ripcord were pulled.
Yeah, it could be, but we haven't really gone too far into that. We are getting close to starting to spend that money, but I don't believe we're there yet.
Okay.
And I'd have to get our consultant, Hess Environmental. He would have that. But like I said, we're pretty comfortable in the process that is outlined with the state that we won't need to pull the ripcord. It's just a matter of time and testing, and then having plans approved. So.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this work session item?
I just want to express my gratitude to all the parties involved. Having worked through this, I feel it's essential that we get this piece of property to expand the parking capabilities at the fairground. And it's certainly been tricky in working with the buyer and in the environmental cleanup. And I know there's been push back and forth from both sides, but I think it's important from my perspective. I think we have the same goal. It's to get this property to ensure that we can have adequate parking. And, obviously this has been tricky to work through dealing with the various cleanup issues and agreements. But I'm just appreciative of everyone, having the good dialogue so that we can find the right way to move forward and get it done.
Thank you.
Okay, another item with Spanish Fork is consider approving an interlocal cooperation agreement for the promotion and production of the Utah County Fair.
Commissioners, if you'd like me to lead out again, Rob Moore, County Attorney's Office. I was asked to draft an agreement between us and Spanish Fork City related to their promotion and essentially running the county fair for the next 5 years for foreseeable future. I did draft that. I sent it to the 3 commissioners. I've also then, at your request, sent it to Spanish Fork City. I did receive some points from Spanish Fork City of maybe concerns or things they'd like to include in the contract. And let me just briefly mention those. Number 1, that there would be an additional 5 years on top of the first 5 years. And the reason for that is because Spanish Fork City, in order to do this, would like to hire a full-time employee. And to do so, they feel like they need a longer commitment. That's been my discussion with Junior Baker, the city attorney of Spanish Fork. Then we jump down to number 3, and I'll come back to number 2 in a second, that the county fair becomes a fairgrounds event, and ultimately that Spanish Fork City would split the profits at 50-50. The reason why they've included that is because it's the intention of the city to go ahead and get sponsors and other things, other people that would help offset costs. And by doing that, and by splitting the profits, it gives them an adequate incentive to do that. Number 4, that an executive committee would be formed, a fair committee, and that they would be able to work together on those between the entities. Number 5, that each entity have liability insurance listing the other as additional insured. I don't necessarily see a big problem with that. And number 6, that the commissioners and the county support the fair through emails, phone calls, appearances, et cetera. And I don't know if there's a big issue with that. Number 2 relates to the funding the fair itself. And the proposal that I was asked to draft essentially created a process whereby an annual fair plan is created each year, and that's kind of redundant, but an annual fair plan is created and approved, and then the commission would look to fund that approved fair plan. Again, going back to the original concern, Spanish Fork's original concern about hiring a city employee or hiring an employee to work the fair, then they're concerned that if we don't have a minimum amount, that it would we potentially
Robert,
lose that employee.
if I may, maybe I'll just jump in right
Please.
away here.
Okay.
Because personally, if I could, I think that all of those issues, the details of this that you're outlining, I don't personally see any issue working those out with Spanish Fork. I think that
Right.
if we are going to hold a fair, that the goal is for it to be a fair that's similar, but hopefully a little better than fairs of recent past. I think Spanish Fork City would be a great partner in that, and I think we could work out a lot of those details. For me, I was a little bit uncomfortable approving an agreement like this. I know this is just a work session because I don't know what the goals are. I mean, it's been a while since we've even had that conversation. Are we trying to have a county fair similar to what's been done in the past? Are we trying to do something different? And so I didn't want to talk about funding levels until we knew, and I realized that there's that fair plan, but I at least wanted to have that conversation of what are we even trying to do before we enter into an agreement with Spanish Fork City. That is even more acute now that I recognize in the past, this has been, we got to hurry and get this in place if we're going to have a fair this year because we're behind the curve. But at this point, with COVID-19 and all the disruption, I think we need to be seriously asking ourselves whether we will have a fair this year at all, in which case that changes this conversation significantly.
Yeah, it does. Rob Moore again. I just mentioned that Orem City just moved or canceled their Summerfest today.
Mm.
So that's but this is 2 months later than that. That's your call, what you guys decide to do. Absolutely.
Yeah, I too,
And this is
go ahead, Nathan.
this is Seth with Spanish Fork.
Oh.
The city is going to be, as far as our Fiesta Day celebration, we're not ready. We're a month and a half after the Orem Summerfest, maybe a month and a couple of weeks, but we aren't ready to call any celebrations yet. But I think, Commissioner, it's a real concern, and probably by this time next month, we'll be getting close to saying it's a go or it's a no-go. And I will maybe add while I've got the floor for a second, the timing for this year's fair is really dicey this year. I'm uncomfortable taking the fair 2020. And I'll just speak for myself. I think Dale and Nick might still be on the call. They could say their thoughts, but I'm uncomfortable taking the fair this year because I don't know how we could put it together I think we could figure that out, and we could figure out some of those details. We're committed. We believe that the fair is a great county event, but you're right. This year's fair is due to the timing of things, it is questionable. So if there's some other avenue that we have to put on the fair, and then what we're doing this year, what we're doing right now maybe comes into full play next year, that is also something I would say let's talk about.
Yeah, and I would agree with those. As much as I hate to see it, I think we need to have that conversation on the fair. I've always been fully in support of the fair, but this is a whole different arena that we're dealing with now. And some of these, we can always work through, issues and talk about payments or expenses or sharing of revenue. But I'm concerned about, first, if it's even going to be possible for us.
Yeah. And I think I hope it's worth noting, I think everyone's aware of this, but in case the city isn't, I think commissioners of the past have done a good job of building up a surplus in our TRT and TRCC accounts, but there is going to be no revenue source that is hit harder than that. It's going to fall off a cliff, or it already is, as we're speaking. And so there's the logistical issues with this, but also just not spending that money this year using it in lieu in a way to help the hotel and restaurant community that are struggling during this period would go a long way as well. So,
well, 2020 may be the year that Thanos snapped, and we'll just kind of have to see as the months go on. But yeah, you're right, Commissioner. The TRCC funds are significantly impacted by the current moment that we're in, and hopefully that changes in a couple of months. But wow, I could have never imagined a cliff like this.
Right. And I just want, I appreciate the city's willingness to look at this with us. I think that's been a breath of fresh air for us on multiple levels. It's just that it's just amazing how quickly the time has just turned on it, and now we're in a different situation altogether. And so, the TRCC and the TRT tax is going to be one where it's going to be highly scrutinized. There's going to be a lot of pullback just to keep everything functioning and going in a direction. So we got to be really careful with it.
So
Commissioners, Nick with Spanish Fork City. Sorry, Seth. The one thing that I would love, I think you guys know how passionate I am about the fair and really about the volunteers you guys have in place. And even if it was a scaled back fair with just a stock show and a demolition derby, COVID-19 permitting, I would love to still see something happen. But if it was not to happen, or if it was to happen in a scaled down version, man, that's something that we'd have to decide ASAP, I guess. So keep that in mind. If it is something you want Spanish Fork City and myself to try to do in even a small fashion this year and start working towards, we need to get on that agreement quickly and try to go as quick as we can.
And that's true, because some of the stock show people have already, went out there with some contracts and so forth for judging. I know I don't think we've signed anything yet on the Derby, but it's one of those things that has to be made quick, and it's hard to make it quick because we don't even know where we're at. So it's a tough one. It's a tough one to battle.
So the reason that I pushed for this, and thank you, Rob, for putting it together, was to address the very issues we've been talking about here. Whether or not we can either put something together this year, what it will look like, and then, Tanner, in answer to your bigger question, I think from my perspective, the aim of this agreement with Spanish Fork is to make sure we have something long-term in place for the fair that has stability and allows it to keep its connection to the agricultural community, promoting the stock show and our agricultural heritage in the county, while expanding it to be reflective of our growing community. And I think Spanish Fork City, with their handling of the Fiesta Days, has demonstrated a capacity to build those type of quality events, and that the fair could become truly something that we continue to celebrate speaking into the future. My personal feelings on the 2020 fair, and this is in conversations with the people at the stock show, some members of the fair board, and with the demolition derby, is that I would love to see us try to put together a scaled down version to where the stock show, which and some of the 4-H exhibits, which I believe is kind of the heart of the fair, it goes forward, and we celebrate those things. Maybe a night of the demolition derby, we could probably cut it down to just a 2 or 3 day event, and obviously all of that would be dependent upon our capacity to do it. But when I look to August, if we can't have a scaled down county fair gathering in August, we're going to have a lot more problems than just canceling the fair with the thoughts of what that does to our economy to not even be able to have a gathering clear into August. And so I would love to see us try and shoot for, if we felt it was achievable, a scaled down version this year that embraced the 4-H component and arts and crafts and vegetable components, the stock show, and probably the demolition derby is kind of the community event, and the fair board, I think, is fairly equipped if we coordinate with Nick and others to put that together. They do most of the heavy lifting anyway there, and so I would think that for this year, if we move forward with a plan to have that scaled back version happen, and then try to get a long-term agreement in place, would be my thought. And that was, again, why I brought this up and asked it to be on the agenda today. So recognizing time frames, we could have that conversation publicly and try and make some decisions on that, in the next week or so.
I wouldn't mind taking a look at that. Who is going to put that proposal together on a scaled down version, and what that looks like? Is it the fair board getting together and saying that's what we'll put it together and this is our proposal?
Yeah, so I think, in my conversations with Nick and some of the people from the livestock show, I think that Nick and I and some members of the fair committee could get together, of course, in a Zoom meeting and put that together to where we could have some type of a scaled down proposal look at it.
Yeah, I'd welcome that, Commissioner Ivy. That would be wonderful.
Well, thank you. Any other
And
comments
so I guess my
on that item?
Go ahead, Tanner.
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask, are there any other comments on the fair work session item?
No, so from my understanding, then it sounds like Commissioner Ains and Commissioner Lee, you would be willing to try and look at a scaled down version if we can put something together for that. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, for me, yes.
And yes, I'm open to taking a look at that, and I think that's what's helpful. Again, I didn't have any major issues with the text or the structure of what Rob Moore put together, or even what some of the things that the city came back with. I just needed to know, what are we shooting for? And so I think if you can add that color, that, okay, this year we're shooting for a little bit scaled down version, and this is what it entails, and therefore this is the budget that's appropriate, I'm certainly willing to take a look at that.
Okay, we'll get together with some people from the livestock and the demolition derby and try and get that put together within the next week.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Okay, our last work session item is number 5, the Willow Park agreement with Lehigh City.
Well, I can lead out again. This is Rob Moore, County Attorney's Office. I was involved in this. I was originally asked to draft a transfer agreement, and then subsequently asked to draft a lease agreement. You should have that before you. I think Lehigh has recently come back with a couple of potential changes they'd like. And then I sent you an email from Richard Nielsen with some concerns that he had. Not a lot of concerns. I think we're pretty close if this is what you want to do. I think mostly where we're apart probably is on the facility, and I'll let Lehigh address that and Richard address that in a second. But my understanding is that we would be leasing this property, the Willow Park, to Lehigh to continue as a park. They would do improvements. They would add some maintenance yard, maintenance facility. They might do some improvements to the roads. They would not be adding any city roads to the park. One thing that was requested by Lehigh, I did tell them that they requested a longer term. My office has taken the position in the past that a term cannot be longer than, the initial term cannot be longer than 50 years because interlocal cooperation agreement kind of caps that at 50 years, even though this may or may not be an interlocal cooperation agreement. But I think we've taken that position with other types of agreements for lease agreements. So we can modify extensions and do other things if you want to, but the initial term should not exceed 50 years. We did the exact same thing with the dispatch and also with Provo City related to the ice sheet. We had an initial term of 50 years. So we've always capped it at that. And there's some other things that Lehigh may bring up with you today. But you have any questions for me before you turn it over to everybody else?
A couple questions.
Please.
When it comes to roads or additional roads in or through the property that touch the property, is that, as it's in a lease agreement and not a transfer, obviously, that would need to come back to us for any additional roads that would go through the property?
Yes, and what I have, let me pull it up here. I'm having some difficulty pulling up things. I believe what I have in here is that Mr. Nilsson would be able to approve adjustments to the park. He'd have to review all the plans, et cetera. And it's not pulling up, Commissioner. I don't have internet access right now.
So why
Rob,
would
I
it come
think
back to the
the
commissioners?
way it is that it comes back to the Public Works Department for review, and
The
then the
plans.
final approval is through the commission.
There we go.
Okay, yeah. And I just need to verify that, but I can't pull it up right now. That's probably the way it is, because that's what I would normally do. But without seeing it, I can tell you. But I can make a note of that and make sure that's the case. When I talked to the Economic Development Director today, he mentioned that they are not planning to put any additional roads, meaning city roads in there, city streets that would be connecting outside the park. They might redo some of the roads that are in the park to make them easier and more accurate, so you can drive them in a better way and et cetera. But that's what the intent was, not to make them city streets and part of the city street system.
So redoing them would be in the same area, same.
Yeah, I think there was
Not
one road
changing.
they mentioned to me that they might be modifying some location of it just because it makes flow a little better. They would need to have an access to the maintenance yard and facility, and so they would have to do that as well.
So if it's anything other than the roads that are already in there, a change in the road, it would come back to us.
Yes, we'd have to prove it. They're leasing our property. That's a substantial, arguably a substantial change to our property. So yes.
Rob, this is Richard. I did find in section 7.1, you actually have it in there that before any construction or improvements other than normal maintenance begins, the city will obtain prior written approval by the county public works director of all plans and specifications. So right now, I thought when we talked before, it had for me to review it and then commission to approve it, but that's not how it's written.
Okay. Well, I can verify that.
So you could change that. Just
Yeah, I could change that
add to
easily.
it.
Rob and commissioners, this is Marlon Eldred, Economic Development Director for the City of Lehigh. I think we're 100% in favor in understanding that any building, any roads, any improvements that are made to the park, we have full intention of working with Richard through that process. It's our intention to make sure that the county is 100% on board with those improvements that we make, because obviously these will be, ongoing maintenance issues and everything like that as we take a look at the park itself. So again, our intent is to follow the county procedure in getting pre-approval, making sure that we submit all the site plans, you know, that we meet all of the county standards before we pull any triggers in installing, maintaining, developing, anything like that.
Okay, great.
I appreciate that.
Rob, did you have any other comments to make about the agreement?
No, unless they had questions for me. I think one thing we were waiting for to hear back from you after you talked to the mayor was about the maintenance facility, and what you found out there.
Okay, so I did. So we do have Mayor Johnson that is on the line with us. I was able to speak with him. So we did meet with Richard. This is probably back in November of last year when we kind of started this process to take a look at the opportunity to take over Willow Park. At that time, we thought that we had stated that we would give them. We had talked about yard maintenance or providing the yard to so he could put material for maintenance on Jordan River Parkway, the trail system, and things like that. We were not under the impression that we were going to provide any type of building space or anything like that. In visiting with the mayor, we had some concerns with regards to liability. You know, what do we do? I guess one of our recommendations back to the county commissioners and to take a look at is we're more than happy within the maintenance yard to provide space for the county to build a building within the maintenance yard if that's something that Richard would like to do. But we had some concerns with us taking that liability on as far as building either on the building we are proposing to build for the county and or building a standalone building. So again, that was not our understanding that we were going to provide an actual building space. We were under the understanding we were going to provide maintenance yard availability so that they could put materials and things of that nature.
Maybe this is Richard. I'll jump in here really quick. We did have a little bit different understanding from what Glenn and I recall from the meeting, that we did talk about a possibility of a bay in a building, and maybe that was just a misunderstanding on what we thought they meant versus what they meant. If it's a concern about the liability of having both of us in the same building, I would say that a possibility of a standalone building for the county at a slightly different location would be acceptable to what we're looking at. But we would like to have something where we can have some inside storage for supplies or a piece of equipment or something like that.
Richard, this is Marlon. Is that something that the county would be willing to build themselves, or is that something that you're going to ask part of this lease agreement for Lehigh City to provide?
My recommendation to the commission would be to ask Lehigh to provide it, since we're providing the park at no charge.
I guess then my question would be to the commissioners. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, my first thought is that you're increasing, that Lehigh City is increasing a maintenance facility area without purchasing of property there, and my first inclination is that if we're not charging, there is an offset that would be helpful for the county. So unless I can see something different, I would tend to agree with Richard on it.
Personally,
I guess another question, or a counter argument that I would bring up is that we are also taking over the maintenance and everything else within the park itself. So snow removal, we're looking at doing a lot of improvements to the area as far as putting in a canoe launch ramp, more indigenous trees, different things like that to the area. So I agree that, there's an offset that we're getting the land, but the flip side of the coin is we're also providing a lot of input, or, a lot of funding back into the project, the park, to make it, even a bit, enhancing the park for Utah County. So I see where you're coming from, that we are getting it, for the least price, but we're also expending a lot of funds to enhance the park itself. Would the county commissioners take that into consideration?
Personally, I'm open to looking at that. I haven't been in these details on this, so this is a work session item. It's something that we can follow up on. But I will say, I almost had the instinct that you're raising. The way that the lease agreement was drafted is that you need the county's approval before you do any improvements. And
Yes.
I kind of was thinking the other way. When I don't have any problems with this draft, but when I was imagining it, it was more, we're only willing to give it to you guys if you agree to some sort of minimum level of investment in, like you're saying, the canoe launch and other things, because this is, it's not really a win or anything for the county. What we're talking about is for the residents. So if by the city taking over, the residents get more amenities and a more useful park that people are able to enjoy, then great. And I think that goes to your point about the city being willing to invest and maintain that. But currently, none of those things are guaranteed in this lease agreement. We're just giving it to you and counting that you're going to do that. So maybe if we go the direction that you're talking about, some sort of minimum investment in exchange for this lease would be requested.
Commissioner, I think we're more than happy to take a look at that and making that part of the agreement. I think that's something that Rob and myself as staff could probably work through those issues and bring something back to you as county commissioners to take a look at, if it would be amenable to you as commissioners.
That certainly makes sense to me.
Okay. I know we have some closed session items and we've been going. Are there any other comments on this Willow Park agreement?
I'd like to ask a question, if that's okay. This is Mayor Johnson.
Hi, Mayor.
So, I just need to make sure that I'm framing everything correctly, because maybe I'm misunderstanding. I really hope I am misunderstanding some of the intention here. What our initial intention was to actually make the improvements in this park that have needed to be made in our consideration for a long time. We think it's a great opportunity for a regional park, and that will serve all the citizens in the area and citizens outside the area, quite frankly. And we've agreed to keep the campground, expand the dog park, make it actually usable where somebody wants to go. We've already talked about some of the unique things we can do there. We agreed to provide a staging area for the maintenance of the trail system. Yes, we wouldn't mind building our own facility there. We don't need to do that. We'd like to improve the trees around there. There's several that need maintenance that just need to be either replaced or cut down. That is not cheap by any means. We want to replace the grass to something that's more usable. We do have intentions to build the boat ramp, make it a very attractive structure. We have no problem making a commitment to that. But here's where the whole deal starts to break down for me, and I'm a little confused at this because I'm not sure why. We're willing to make the improvements. We're willing to follow county standards as far as the road reconstruction. We'll follow the road widths. I'm not sure that we have any intention to change any of the roads except for the trail system. We don't necessarily, and the citizens frankly don't like the Saratoga River Trail going down one of the streets there. We'd like to separate that, so that is a separate trail system. But improving this park to the state we think it ought to be in, it's a pretty significant investment for Lehigh City. And we're willing to make that investment. We're doing it for the very same people that Utah County is doing it for. And I'm not sure any improvement we want to make, if we make an improvement, we bring it back to the county and the county has to review it. We go through the whole review process. I'm fine showing you what we have, but I'm a little nervous, having worked with entitlement situations most of my career, being dictated at every step or every improvement we make along the way, what we can and cannot do there. I don't mind a review situation. I'm fine with that. The shorter lease is okay, I guess, except for the concern I have about a 50-year lease. If we have a 50-year lease and at the end it can be terminated immediately by the county, then really all we have is a 35-year lease. Because I can't speak for the people who's going to take my place in the future, but I'm pretty sure nobody's going to want to make significant investments in that property when they don't know in 15 years if they're going to have any control over those improvements. So, I mean, I think there's some things we can do here. I started in this thinking that there was an opportunity to help the county come up with a facility that would be beneficial to the region. But I guess I'm a little confused at some of the more recent demands and concerns that have come up.
So, Mayor, perhaps one thing then, it sounds like one of your biggest concerns is part of the review for improvements. Part of my initial thought there, just thinking out loud, would be we probably could establish some type of, a value number there. I think in my mind, when I'm thinking like an improvement, you're putting a major structure up, something like that. But, cutting down the trees or smaller type of improvements, putting in grass, those type of things, I guess I don't really see those as necessarily needing to come before us. But if we're going to build, 5 major pavilions or a new building or something like that, those are kind of the things I would think of where we would just, go through that process. But not necessarily the smaller, kind of more day-to-day or beautification items that you had mentioned earlier.
Okay, that certainly helps clarify that item.
Richard, this is Marlon. Would it be beneficial, and I apologize, commissioners, for taking some time with this. Richard, would it be beneficial if we sat down with you and kind of created the draft plan that we have for the area and pretty much at least get your buy-off to say, hey, I agree with all the placements and stuff, and then we can still come to you for the major. We're going to put up the pavilions now in the exact location we've kind of agreed on, buildings or whatever. That would, I feel like, give us the comfort level, but also give you the comfort level that you know exactly what we're doing in the park area. Would that be amenable to you, Richard?
I think that would be a good way to go. It'd give us at least a concept plan. Maybe it's not the exact final drawings, but it gives both us as the public works side of things and the commission an idea of what you're proposing in the park. And if you have an idea on, okay, this is in the first 5 years, this is in the second 5 years, something like that, so we kind of have an idea on the time frame of those different improvements to the best that you can. We're not looking at a hard, I need this by such and such a date, but maybe there is on some of the things. But some of the improvements, maybe this is more like the 10-year plan, and I think that would be helpful.
I think it would be
Perfect,
helpful
Richard. We can get that taken care of.
to include Rob Moore in those conversations. And again, for me, I'd be willing to make that trade of if there's an outline of what is going to be done. My interest is that I think the city will do a better job and will create a more attractive park. And so if we can establish what will be done and they make some sort of commitment to accomplish that, then I'm not so much concerned at all about the approval or even the review process of any investments made consistent with that plan.
I'm much more comfortable with that, Commissioner Ivey. Thank you.
And I'm fine with that too. Going with the yard and a future building there, I think there does need to be some consideration with that. Land up north is getting more and more expensive. It's a piece of ground that we own right now and control. And there are needs that we have that's going to just increase on the northern part of the county. And so however that's negotiated with and talked about how, if you build a building, if you don't build a building, but we have the ability to build a building in the future, it just gives us some options for the future on what can be done there.
We can do that.
Okay, thanks, everyone. We will end our
Thank you
work
very much,
session.
Commissioners.
Thank you.
Are there any public comments?
Ralph Clegg, Health Department. Listen, Commissioners, I just wanted to catch you real quick because I knew you've been in meetings and busy. And we have the new public health order ready to go. It again mirrors the order that we'd be required to do with the state. And just wanted to see if you had any concerns about that going forward at this
I
time.
haven't seen it, so when did it come
I
out?
know, and I've been emailing you stuff. I emailed
Okay.
you the state order. I have a copy here.
Can you just summarize what the state has done or changed?
Yeah, I will. The nice thing about
Ralph,
this
in
is-
looking
yeah.
through this, it looks like it's pretty much the exact same as what we've been doing, just extending the date. Would that be a safe to say?
Well, yes, other than they've added a couple of things, which we were gonna add anyway if we didn't get something from them. One is, to clarify that we do expect individuals who are asked to self-isolate or self-quarantine to do that. Another thing it does, which we recommended as local health departments, is to tweak the food service a little bit in that it allows someone to go in and order a meal, and then they can wait outside, or if there's not a lot of crowd gathering, to do the same thing inside, which helps the restaurants a little bit. And then it just really, we cut out some of the things and just cite, please look at the governor's stay home, stay safe guidance or directive for most of those recommendations. And so that's probably the biggest things that are different with this.
So-
Other than that, there's
So I
not.
want to clarify if I can, on this first one with this stay-at-home, self-isolation and self-quarantine. This is for individuals who have tested positive.
Yes, or
And
have been
so-
exposed to somebody that's positive.
Yeah, because there have been instances up north where individuals have tested positive and then refused to do quarantine and were running around the community, in which that becomes a public health issue.
Right, and at that point, they've actually been issued a direct order to them, which if they violate, could be enforced
Somebody
criminally.
without that, it's.
No,
we're not-
again,
okay.
most people are gonna be cooperative. There's gonna be a few that you have to kind of crack down on a little bit. But again, what it does just emphasize is that if they're asked to self-isolate or self-quarantine because they have the disease or have been exposed to someone who has the disease, that they are expected to do that. It has that last provision that says those things don't provide if we, on let's see, section 1(1)(c), if we actually have to give an order under Title 26, then, the provisions where we're really just asking them to do it don't apply. Then they're under order to do it. And then the other
Ralph?
thing is, yeah.
Just a question, because I've had a couple of emails on this and various, calls or whatever. On the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who have recently come home from their missions,
Yes.
what is the quarantine requirements for them?
What the church has asked them, the missionaries were asked to quarantine for 2 weeks before they came home. And then because of the travel itself, they've been asked to quarantine for 2 weeks in their home. Their family members, since they're not positive, unless they become positive, this would change. But since they're not positive for the coronavirus, their family members have just been asked to monitor themselves for any symptoms of the disease. And so
Okay.
so that's where that stands as of right now. Now, if a missionary came back and they tested positive, then that would kick in all the other requirements, just like it would for
Perfect.
anybody
And
else.
I appreciate that clarification because, like I said, I just had you know, a couple people, one in particular, had reached out to me a couple times, you know, on that issue, and so I wanted
Sure.
to
So I'm
be
one,
able to answer them appropriately.
We get the same questions.
I'm one in that situation. My son's come home. They didn't even have any indication of it where he was serving, but he had been in this apartment for 2 weeks before. They had 28 days worth of food, and then they all of a sudden shipped him home. Now he's there for another 2 weeks,
Right.
and we're watching him.
And so
already.
you're watching him and you're watching yourselves, and that's what's been asked to happen, so. And I think people, you know, largely are so good in our community, and they're so responsive. You know, there's always a few that try to push things a little bit, but most are so good. I think, you know, the governor's approach, and for Utah County, realizing some counties have gone even more stringent, but I think for Utah County, this is appropriate
Can I ask
to
you one
follow
more
the governor's
question?
order, which we'd have to do anyway.
Under E, it says an employee of food services establishment may not, and then under, you have it, right below it, it says participate in food preparation. This is on page 4 of 8 at the bottom. Participate in food preparation, handling, or delivery if the employee handles cash or credit cards. I'm not sure what, during the course of the business, unless the employee first uses cleaning measures, including use of the best practices of the department. So are you saying, is this a not? They're not supposed to be an
No,
employee of food
they're
services?
they're supposed to do that.
They're
So,
supposed to, okay, I just looked.
you know, and again, that's another thing that's been freed up a little bit, that if they'll, you know, before it was, they were prohibited from, if they're taking cash or credit cards, they were prohibited from participating at all in the food preparation process. Now they're allowed to do it if they follow good hand washing and procedures, so I think, and then, you know, there's the other thing maybe that's a little different is they outline some of the non-essential things and just advised individuals to avoid those businesses unless, you know, they have to go to them. These are the businesses where you really can't, you know, practice social distancing. It's hard to be 6 feet away from a person if they're giving you a haircut, right? You know, and so, you know, but again, it's leaving it up to individuals to choose. And that was interesting because, you know, waiting for this, I was planning on putting something in there very similar to that. But still leaving it up to individuals to choose. You know,
And this,
we teach them, we educate them, and they can still choose.
so this order is, I haven't obviously looked
Sure.
over, so it's good till when? When's
I've
the
put
date on
it till April 15th, or 17th.
April
And the
17th.
reason I've gone 2 days beyond what the governor has gone, or the Department of Health, is it has been such a nightmare waiting for them to update things. You know, like I said, I need to get this out probably by 6, or I won't have any staff to help me. And that's why I'm trying to get it here. And so that gives us a little more time if they're going to be that slow at the state level to get things out. Yeah, it meets their timetable, but it doesn't always meet our timetable. And so that gives us a little flexibility to meet our timetable. So. But, you know, if things change significantly, we can always undo the order, so. But I don't anticipate that's going to be the case. I think this may last even a little longer. We'll have to wait and see.
So you'd probably say this is an order with recommendations as well.
Yes, yeah, the first section's kind of the order. The second section is the recommendations.
Thank you for all your work.
Okay.
We know you're working around the clock on this.
yeah.
I appreciate your help.
Do you have any reservations or concerns? Okay. I just want to be able to go forward with it without, you know, upsetting the cart too much. So. Okay, thanks so much.
Okay, is there any additional public comment? And I think we do need to hold closed sessions, closed meetings for
Lease and sell and personnel.
And litigation.
5, 6, and 8.
Yeah, I don't know, do we need sale? I'm not, if you have something, I don't think I have anything. I don't know.
purchase, right, number 6?
Yeah, 5, 6, and 8.
Yeah, purchase for the lease.
Yes.
We need to terminate this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet.
Okay, I'll make a motion then that we strike number 7 on our published regular agenda.
Second.
A motion and second to strike 7. All in favor, say aye.
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 Passes 3-0.
We'll make a motion that we approve and set a date, time, and location for today's date after this meeting as stated, number 5, 6, and 8.
Second.
We have a motion and second to hold the closed meetings in 5, 6, and 8. All in favor, say aye.
Aye?
Aye. That passes 3-0. Okay, we will now move into our closed meetings.